If you think medieval maps depicted a flat Earth, you might be confusing them with pizza menus. The common myth that medieval Europeans pictured the Earth as a frisbee lazily spinning in some cosmic salad dressing. In reality, their maps weren't auditioning to put Google Earth out of business. They were more like spiritual art installations than GPS guides. Thanks to Aristotle and his ancient Greek fan club, scholars in the Middle Ages had long embraced the round Earth concept. They weren't prepping expeditions to find where the ocean spills off the edge. So those famous T&O maps? They weren't waving a flag saying, "World flat, handle with care." Instead, they neatly organized known lands, Europe, Asia, Africa, in a way that felt both educational and, frankly, blessed. Yes, medieval globes existed, even if they were less collectible than Beanie Babies. Most map illustrations dialed up the drama for storytelling, not geography. If medieval cartographers were flat earthers, their edges would come marked with, "Here be dragons," and "Oh yeah, mind the drop." Medieval scholars wanted spices, not a nosedive into oblivion. And while T&O maps may not have nailed accuracy, at least they never confused the world with a pancake, unlike some breakfast menus. Alongside these flat Earth depictions, medieval maps often included dragons and sea monsters, symbolizing real dangers on unexplored seas. Picture a medieval mariner, map in hand, squinting nervously at a patch ominously labeled, "Here be dragons." Would you set sail, or politely suggest the crew take up knitting instead? Back then, maps weren't just about longitude, latitude, or "you are here." Instead, explorers faced sprawling unknowns adorned with dragons, sea serpents, and fish so monstrous they looked like sushi on a bad day. This wasn't idle medieval doodling. Such monsters sent a clear message: proceed with caution, or have your will ready. When a mapmaker plopped a dragon over some uncharted waters, it was the original, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Cartographers essentially shrugged behind their ink pots. No news from this zone. Good luck. Sailors, superstitious and fond of not being eaten or shipwrecked, wisely steered clear of those monster patches. Smart move, because reefs, storms, or hostile ships usually lurked at the same coordinates. The difference? Today's maps swap dragons for caution buoys. But let's be honest, if dragons really did hide out there, your GPS would be flashing a frantic, recalculating, "Run!" Moreover, amidst these fearsome creatures, Jerusalem held a central place, reflecting its spiritual importance in medieval cartography. Imagine firing up Google Maps and finding Jerusalem stubbornly pinned dead center, no matter how far you zoom or scroll. Medieval mapmakers, obsessed with cosmic balance, would have loved this. Their maps basically shouted, "Jerusalem, the world's ultimate VIP, enter the TO map." Yes, that's the real name. These ancient schematics sliced the world into three neat parts. Europe perched on top, because medieval North was clearly overrated. Asia taking front and center stage, and Jerusalem basking in the spotlight like a holy celebrity. But geography? Pfft! This was all about spiritual GPS. For Christians, Jerusalem was the divine epicenter, its address stamped in Scripture. Ezekiel's prophecy serving as the medieval equivalent of a Google review. Accuracy wasn't the point. Faith fueled their pens, not satellites. Ask a 13th century traveler for directions, and the answer was always, "Head toward Jerusalem, then keep going." Sure, Jerusalem isn't the planet's actual belly button. Tell that to a monastic mapmaker. As navigation got better, maps grew more realistic, but that myth of sacred centrality clung on, caught somewhere between nostalgia and theology. Meanwhile, somewhere in a monastery, a medieval monk is nervously refreshing his mental Google My Maps. This central positioning also influenced the belief that the world ended at the edges of the maps Europeans created. Imagine sketching your world with a wobbly pencil and declaring anything beyond the edge as dragon territory. Back in ye olden times, European maps didn't just fade out with neat borders. They signed off with an existential shrug, garnished with sea monsters, oddly bumpy islands, or the timeless classic, "Here be dragons." Let's face it, back then, Google Maps was mostly blank space and zero coffee shop pins. Folks truly believed that venture too far, and you'd either get gobbled by a kraken or suffer a sunburn without anyone left to gossip. Sea monsters? The unofficial mascots of places we haven't bothered to visit yet. Sure, the ancient Greeks tossed out some decent guesses about the unknown, but over centuries, those facts twisted faster than a game of telephone on a rocking ship. Eventually, some brave explorers rolled the dice, finding the edge wasn't a cliff, but an invitation to more world. As new lands got mapped, maps mostly shelved the doodles and switched to actual geography, proving knowledge beats dragon paranoia, though it does make for less thrilling party stories. Despite these beliefs, specific map types like the TO maps served practical purposes beyond mere symbolism. Picture a medieval sailor at the helm, squinting anxiously at a map that looks like a poorly sliced pizza, except the toppings are Asia, Europe, and Africa. And none of the slices actually reach the crust. Many imagine these TO maps, the famous circles with a giant T inside, as trusty guides through turbulent seas. In reality, if sailors actually relied on TO maps, we'd all be taking beach vacations in Atlantis by now. TO maps were medieval Europe's ultimate humblebrag. Yes, we charted the world, but about as usefully as a pie chart showing grandma's house location. The T slices the continents, and the O is an oceanic moat. But don't expect coastlines, scale bars, or nifty danger zones. These maps' idea of detail was more like, here be something. Actual mariners flirted with portolan charts, packed with ports and compass lines. The only way a TO map ever helped a sailor? Double duty as a fan during those sweaty, what now moments on deck. So next time you hear about medieval map makers, remember, if it looks like circular art, maybe leave it safely tucked on a library shelf. Yet, contrary to popular assumptions, not all medieval maps ignored the scientific knowledge available at the time. Ever seen a medieval map? It's like Google Maps after a wild night out, waking up with a dragon tattoo and some seriously questionable location data. Legend has it medieval cartographers treated map-making like a fantasy fan fiction contest, doodling sea monsters wherever their quills fancied, and plotting unicorns with the enthusiasm of Starbucks dotting the city. But here's the kicker. These parchment Picassos weren't just fueled by mead and daydreams. The best medieval maps actually cribbed from top-tier sources: ancient Greek geometry, Roman expeditions, and the brightest minds of the Islamic Golden Age. Sure, they squeezed in a miracle or two. Maybe a biblical scene? Think Atlas meets Sunday school. So while a TO map might plop Jerusalem right in the spiritual GPS center, like all roads genuinely lead there, it wasn't total nonsense. Coastlines, cities, even rivers came from real travelers, not just fairy tales. As for those dragons and unicorns, consider them medieval Wi-Fi dead zones. The cartographer's way of saying, I haven't been here, you're on your own. Who needs Waze when here be sea serpents is the ultimate proceed with caution. Furthermore, the creation and use of maps extended beyond just kings and clergy, involving a wider audience. Ever wondered if medieval peasants navigated with Google Maps or just followed the irresistible smell of freshly baked bread? Spoiler alert, there were no rerouting notifications back then, unless you count getting chased off by a suspiciously territorial goose. Legend has it that maps were royal toys, reserved for kings, queens, and that one obsessive monk who collected gold leaf-like Pokemon cards. Sure, maps were status symbols, a swirl of parchment, fine artistry, and a generous sprinkle of "Here be dragons" in shiny gold. But it wasn't all dragon-chasing exclusivity for the common folk. Peasants didn't roam the countryside, confused and lost. Nope, they relied on mental maps sharper than a hawk's eyesight, handed down through stories, and navigated using landmarks like Mr. Oak or Lady Big Rock. Ask a cow for directions? Congratulations, you've just activated medieval GPS. Good pasture sense. Just pray it doesn't moo you over a cliff. Those grand gilded maps in castles and monasteries? Pure unapologetic power flex. But once the printing press rolled in, suddenly everyone could figure out if turnips grew east or west. So while peasants didn't throw map parties, even the humblest farmer could find their way from here to turnip field. No divine scrolling required. While maps served diverse users, the notion that every map was painstakingly precise does not hold true. Picture a cartographer hunched over parchment, sweating more than a spelling bee contestant facing the word onomatopoeia. Because mapmaking wasn't just doodling with fancy compasses and the occasional dramatic flourish. You might have heard medieval maps were ancient GPS, minus the soothing, recalculating voice. Time to bust that myth. These maps weren't precision tools. They were gloriously sloppy mashups of rumor, hearsay, and the occasional optimistic "here be dragons" warning. Take that, Google Earth. Coastal outlines? Rougher than breadcrumbs and wild guesswork. Mountain ranges? Artistic license gone rogue. Maps weren't merely wayfinding devices. They were cosmic fan art, with Jerusalem crowned center stage like the OG main character. Navigation. If you craved precision, you'd have better luck tailing a squirrel with a sense of direction. The result? Islands that never existed, continents shaped like potatoes, and enough mythical beasts to make even flat earthers think twice. Accuracy? The only thing these maps truly nailed was just how spectacularly lost you were about to get. In addition, the authority of influential figures like Ptolemy shaped map-making traditions from an early stage. Picture every old map as a smartphone running ancient software, with Ptolemy as the default app. For over a millennium, his turn-by-turn directions set the European standard for not getting hopelessly lost. But let's shatter a myth. Despite his VIP status in Renaissance geography, most folks outside the Mediterranean hadn't laid eyes on a real Ptolemaic map until the printing press threw the ultimate launch party. Medieval Europeans mostly rolled with TO maps, which were so off-base they might as well have come with a "for entertainment only" label. Meanwhile, Islamic scholars, the overachievers of their day, mapped the known world with such precise math that Ptolemy's ancient GPS looks more like guesswork by candlelight. It wasn't until the 1400s that Ptolemy's maps went viral, Renaissance style. Suddenly, everyone was printing and sharing them like the geographical TikTok of their time. Did Ptolemy dominate world mapping? Not exactly. He was more a local celeb, going global centuries after his original release. And if you ever shipwrecked following his maps, just remember, blame the original buggy software. This influence eventually led to efforts toward standardization of maps across medieval Europe. Ever tried giving someone directions only to discover your left translates to their "where on earth are we?" Welcome to medieval Europe, a time when map-making was less about where things actually were and more about where your heart, or the wine stain, told you they should be. Medieval cartographers were the ultimate creatives. Standardization was for party poopers. Some insisted east was up, others swore by north, and occasionally orientation depended entirely on how the parchment folded that day. Cities and nations enjoyed egos the size of continents, with capitals swelling to rival entire kingdoms. Religious priorities trumped accuracy, parking Jerusalem smack dab at the spiritual bullseye of the world. Rivers bent and twisted, not due to geography, but because the ink ran out or the mapmaker just gave up. Want Paris? Ask 5 mapmakers. Get 6 versions, one probably featuring a dragon for flair. Navigating their maps was like ordering a meal from a menu written in riddles and mystery ingredients. Real coordinates? Back then, if your map had GPS, recalculating meant, "here be dragons." Yet somehow, these wildly imaginative works paved the way, eventually, for longitude and latitude. Thankfully, with fewer mythical monsters. Nevertheless, some specific map types, such as portolan charts, were primarily used for coastal navigation rather than inland exploration. Picture this: trying to find your way to a medieval tavern armed with a pirate's map. Enter the legendary portolan chart, the ultimate craze for salty sea dogs chasing nautical adventures. Or so the story goes. Most folks assume landlubbers just wandered foggy towns, mapless and doomed to miss every happy hour. Surely only sailors wielded those fancy sea charts, right? Not quite. These maritime marvels double as overland guides for medieval traders, diplomats, and map-hoarding nobles. Their swirling coastlines weren't just for ship captains. Those twisty rivers, dotted cities, and cryptic icons sometimes helped navigate land routes to major ports. If you didn't mind imagining every meadow as a miniature ocean. Using a portolan chart to find a bakery inland was like navigating the subway with a treasure map. Delightfully baffling. But flash one in your manor, and visitors assumed you were plotting international trade, or just possessed a fabulously expensive, utterly impractical sense of direction. So don't mock that Italian duke clutching his chart. He might be on his way to Venice, or just hopelessly lost in his own backyard. Similarly, The medieval Mappae Mundi combined accurate real locations with symbolic and religious elements. Imagine thinking the Middle Ages' most epic maps were the Google Earth of their day. If you picture medieval travelers whipping out a Mappa Mundi to find the nearest bakery, you're giving those maps way too much credit. Legend says they were accurate, showing real cities, seas, and borders. But in practice, Mappa Mundi were a charming jumble of fact and fantasy. For every Florence or Constantinople, you'd also stumble upon the Antipodes, a land of people who walk on their heads, monstrous tribes, and even paradise itself. Medieval mapmakers? Not exactly sticklers for precision. Think of them as part geographer, part theologian, and part bored teenager doodling unicorns in the margins of a textbook. Take the Hereford map. Unicorns, dog-headed folk, and Eden all make starring appearances. Plus, they flipped the whole thing upside down. Or rather, east was on top, not north. So good luck navigating your next road trip with one. Honestly, if your GPS ever tells you to turn left at Unicorn Street, congratulations, you're just following medieval directions. In the navigation game, these maps were outmatched by modern cereal box treasure hunts. Indeed, while the map of Mundi may appear as just a piece of parchment, its significance extended beyond mere materiality. Ever called a globe just a ball with fancy doodles? The map of Mundi feels that burn, and probably rolls its ancient parchment eyes in response. Popular myth paints it as a medieval monk's doodle binge, a bored scribe absent-mindedly sketching unicorns and tossing Spain in between lunch and vespers. But here's the reality. The map of Mundi was basically the medieval world's Wikipedia, Lonely Planet, and cosmic instruction manual rolled into one gigantic, hand-cramped masterpiece. Crafted by artists and scholars, likely the reason behind a few prematurely aged monk eyeballs, this map blended geography, biblical history, and creatures the creators either read about, dreamed up, or flat-out invented. It wasn't built to help you find the nearest tavern. It was designed to help you ponder your place in God's grand universe. Forget glove compartments. This thing hung in cathedral walls, not chariots, which, by the way, also didn't have glove compartments. Imagine losing it in your backpack, centuries of wisdom swimming in your leaky water bottle. Map of Mundi. Not your Google Earth, unless Google Earth came with bonus dragons and a side of soul-searching. However, with the onset of the Age of Exploration, the relevance of many medieval maps was called into question. If medieval maps could talk, they'd be asking for directions to the nearest recycling bin post-Columbus, preferably somewhere west of Jerusalem, or wherever their map boldly declares, "Here be dragons." Legend has it that overnight, these ancient parchments became as obsolete as dial-up internet, thanks to explorers like Columbus and Magellan. But in reality, most medieval maps, like the famous T&O diagrams, were less Google Maps and more Lord of the Rings fan art. Picture salvation routes neatly highlighted, with Spain conveniently optional. Before the Age of Exploration, accuracy was, let's say, a flexible concept. Medieval cartography treated geography like a sketchbook for theology and symbolism, putting actual coastlines somewhere on the back burner. Columbus's crew didn't toss their old maps into the sea, they just scribbled shopping lists in the blank corners. But let's not be too harsh. These maps weren't just geography lessons. They were vibrant portraits of cultural, religious, and political mindsets. Some quirks even sailed into the Renaissance. After all, who could resist doodling a sea monster? And today, historians still sneak peeks at them, partly for insight, partly to spice up otherwise deathly dull PowerPoints. Moreover, the focus of many maps remained on Europe and its neighboring regions despite wider discoveries. Picture a medieval map. Think Google Maps on dial-up, mostly stuck on home turf, with wild gaps where "Here be dragons" threw mysterious tantrums. The myth says these maps were stubbornly Eurocentric, blind to anything beyond Christendom's doorstep. But let's not tar all Mappae Mundi with the same blinkered brush. Many, like the famously cluttered Hereford Mappa Mundi, nailed Jerusalem dead center. Sure, geography took a backseat to biblical priorities, but Asia and Africa still squeezed in, flaunting enough creative flair to make abstract expressionists jealous. Meanwhile, Islamic and Chinese scholars, busier charting the globe while Europe debated dragon surveillance, were mapping coastlines and trade routes with surprising accuracy. Thanks to Silk Road gossip sessions, think international shipping, but with camels. Their maps looked a lot less mythical and a lot more practical. European mariners, however, weren't lost in fantasy. They craved portolan charts, laser-focused on coastlines and compass roses. GPS wasn't on the horizon, so navigating medieval maps took either sheer genius or actual wizardry. So yes, medieval Europe hogged the center stage, but their mapmakers weren't clueless, just a tad nearsighted and definitely in desperate need of corrective lenses, and maybe a medieval version of TripAdvisor. Finally, challenging assumptions. Evidence shows that women also engaged in the making and use of maps during medieval times. Picture this: medieval women clutching lace handkerchiefs, supposedly lost without men or maps. Legend has it that while knights galloped across kingdoms armed with trusty compasses and parchment, women wandered aimlessly, waiting for someone to ask for directions, or, failing that, to invent Google Maps. Here's the kicker. The story that medieval maps and navigation were strictly a man's game is about as accurate as a medieval flat earth chart. In reality, women, especially noble women and sharp-minded nuns, were often highly educated. They read, commissioned, and even owned elaborate maps and travel accounts. Take Marjorie Kempe, the legendary mystic pilgrim. She roamed Europe, surely not just relying on divine Wi-Fi, but likely following itineraries or studying maps. Convents? Think Hogwarts for manuscript magic. Nuns copied, illustrated, and sometimes annotated maps with flair. Meanwhile, wealthy medieval women bankrolled cartographic masterpieces. You don't have to draw the map to rule the map game. And hats off to local women, whose intricate mental maps steered villages clear of plagues and helped everyone track down the year's best medieval shoe sale. No Google? No problem. Medieval women, busting stereotypes and finding their way home centuries before GPS was even a twinkle in the sky.